Welcome. Today we're joined by Lilit Gevorgian, a Russia and CIS country analyst with IHS Global Insight. Ms. Gevorgian, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
In terms of foreign actors like NATO, the EU, the USA and Russia, they have been pushing for a return to the ceasefire. But Turkey has pledged its full support to Azerbaijan. Many analysts have pointed to a marked change in rhetoric coming from Ankara. Can you speak a bit about this change of resolve by Turkey and what this means for Armenia?
Well, it's a very worrying development, not only for Armenia, but for the entire region. As you rightly pointed out, traditionally Turkey had lended its diplomatic support to Azerbaijan, but by and large it remained sort of neutral in this conflict. However, what has changed in this time around, and I would say starting from July, is that more increased Turkish intervention. We saw the change of rhetoric, and we also noticed that it didn't meet any opposition from Russia, which is traditionally seen as the key regional sort of superpower that is regional power that is overseeing this conflict. And I think that has also emboldened Turkey to exploit this conflict. The conflict, as we're seeing, there are numerous reports of actual physical sort of, Turkish military presence there, as well as international media has been extensively reporting on the arrival of Islamists that are backed by Turkey from Syria. So against this backdrop, what we're seeing is Turkey trying to reassert its influence not only over the conflict but also in Azerbaijan. Domestic drivers that are influencing President Erdogan's decision are also quite obvious. The economy is on the brink of financial crisis. And as we've seen in recent years, President Erdogan is really relying on more nationalistic segment of the electorate. So adventures like this are likely to bring some political credit domestically. But as I said, this is the most worrying development, I'd say, from 1990s. And this is why I believe the international response is shaping up, so focusing on that element, particularly the Turkish involvement and the appearance of Islamists in the zone of conflict.
So, as you mentioned, this has gained international attention, particularly the transportation of Turkish-backed Islamist and other militant groups to Azerbaijan. Do you think this is a sign of the conflict taking a more international dimension? And how do you think other actors in the region and around the world will perceive this move by Turkey?
Well, it's a fast-moving situation, quite fluid, and I would say that in the worst-case scenario, we can see if the conflict is not stopped right now, really, and if the inflow of this Islamist continues, then we can see the Karabakh conflict turning into a zone of proxy confrontation, military confrontation, something that I think wisely all sides involved have been avoiding for many decades. And it is alarming to see that the Azerbaijani leadership had made such a controversial, to put it mildly, move, controversial for Azerbaijan and Azeri interests as well.
And as you mentioned, the economic situation, some people have pointed to a correlation between falling oil prices and Azerbaijan taking a more aggressive foreign policy stance. Some have portrayed Azerbaijan's actions as a ploy to distract the populace from a looming economic crisis. But others think that this narrative is overstated. What do you think?
Well, look, I think domestic factors have always played a role in period of these escalations. I wouldn't discount the economic aspect of this. So briefly looking at what Azerbaijan is facing. For the first time during the reign of President Aliyev, the Azeri economy will see the sharpest contraction. Our company is forecasting around 5%. They've never seen such a drop. Azerbaijan remains one of the top most energy dependent economies in the world. It's really on par with Turkmenistan. In the CIS region. So obviously the crude price crash as well as the bleak outlook for the recovery, these are all mounting. And if we remember in 2016 when we saw similar escalation prior to that, the Azeri central bank was forced to let its currency to float, and that caused social discontent and protests. Now, what we think is likely also to happen is similar scenario. Very difficult economic decisions are ahead. There's also the domestic political side of it, that Aliyev and his wife and vice president of Azerbaijan have been involved in sort of top-down shake-up of the political system as well as economic asset consolidation. To carry out all of this, to shake up sort of entrenched interest, to have this the change of guard, so to speak, you need political capital. You have to justify why you need to stay, or your family needs to stay in power. In the past as well, we've seen that on the Armenian side, before the 2018 revolution, often the Karabakh issue had been also used to refrain from any political changes, albeit Armenia is much more cautious because the Armenian side favors a status quo, something that Azerbaijan obviously is not happy with, and the Azerbaijani government believes that they have built up enough economic might to challenge the status quo and solve the conflict outside of the peace process, as they are unhappy with the offers that are on the table for Azerbaijan.
Also, with regards to democracy levels, these hostilities are taking place 2 years after the 2018 Armenian Velvet Revolution, and Armenia has made some major strides in terms of democracy, human rights, anti-corruption, economic growth, while Azerbaijan is still ranked by major international organizations as an authoritarian regime. Do you think this has any relation to the current hostilities?
Well, I think I sort of partially touched upon some of the aspects of this. In countries where you don't have democratically elected government, or you have authoritarian regimes, obviously any conflicts can become a source of exploitation for political legitimacy. So that's a problem. That's already in itself is a destabilizing factor. Looking at Armenia and the revolution and the developments, domestic developments that have been happening in Armenia, have also created a perception that that this government, the new government, is not really managing the situation properly, that there is a rising Moscow-aligned opposition that is gaining strength, that Armenian media, I would argue that over 50% of it is still controlled by the old regime. So perhaps from outside, the perception has been that there is a chaos and mismanagement, and that the coronavirus pandemic has also weakened Armenia. And perhaps this is, and more importantly, that Armenian government and the Russian government are not getting along, and as Russia has been quite openly pointing its preference for some of the political leaders from the old regime. So from the political perspective, Azerbaijan can interpret this as an opportune moment to take advantage of domestically, politically and economically weakened Armenia.
Well, you mentioned Russia in terms of domestic politics, and Russia has of course been calling for a return to the ceasefire and the restart of peace talks. Meanwhile, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev and now current head of Russia's Security Council has stated that there can be no resolution using military force. How do you perceive Russia's role in this conflict in 2020? And as you mentioned, it is known that the Kremlin has had some spats with the Pashinyan government. So how do you see Russia's motives in all of this?
Let me just clarify. The current state of the conflict, what we're witnessing, is really one of no negotiations and expectation of war. And we didn't enter this phase of conflict after 2018 when Pashinyan government came to power. We entered this phase of conflict in 2016 in April. And we all know that, I mean, this has been extensively discussed, that this is linked to the Russian vision of the conflict resolution, or so to speak, the Lavrov plan, where Russia sees ultimately increasing its presence in the zone of conflict, whether it's through peacekeepers, Russian peacekeepers, or international or mostly Russian controlled peacekeepers. But anyway, boots on the ground, and also ensuring that Azerbaijan receives a deal that will be enticing enough to bring Azerbaijan into closer, I should stress closer, because Azerbaijan is already quite close economically and politically to Russia, even closer, at least economically, to Russia. So that plan, to materialize that plan, you obviously as a strategic partner, you have to take a step back, and what we've seen, Russia has effectively changed the balance of power, military power, by becoming the main arms supplier to both sides, and what we're seeing now is the routine repetition of this logic of the conflict. So from Azeri perspective, effectively having green light starting from 2016, if not earlier, they see that there is an opportunity of resolving the conflict through military means. Russia's reserve and no intervention in the face of Turkish involvement is also suggesting that perhaps they see that the unraveling situation so far is fitting their interest. Slightly weaker Pashinyan government or Armenia that will ask for Russian military support in the form of peacekeepers is something that will fit very well with Russian interest. This will also increase Russian influence over Azerbaijan. What we're seeing is actually two types of messages. One is the official Kremlin, and one is semi-official Kremlin coming through the tweets of Russia Today's chief editor, using her as a sounding board. And the key message is the following: either you choose to continue ultimate integration with Russia, no questions asked, and accept the Lavrov plan, or you will find yourself alone. Of course, Russia has its own interests, and ultimately there are some red lines that the other parties, such as Turkey and Azerbaijan, cannot cross. However, those red lines do not coincide with Armenian red lines. They are a bit further up, and they do not include some of the regions that are controlled by Armenia. And this is, I think, the most worrying part. But ultimately, it is unfortunate that the conflict has entered into a period where we're really looking at the gun diplomacy, because the peace process is effectively dead at the moment, and it's very difficult to see who will, of great powers, who will be able to resuscitate it.
Ms. Gevorgian, thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.